Welcome back, everyone. Today we are talking about the worst Boros commanders. These commanders suck. Do not try them at home. So yeah, a few years ago, I started this project to try and play every Boros commander, and I stopped working on the project in October of 2022 because I got really busy with work and doing other things. At that point in time, there were 54 Boros commanders, and I had played 47 of them. I had 7 remaining, and it was mostly the ones that hadn't been printed on Magic Online. Nowadays, there are like 104 Boros commanders, and I'm very sad because I'm still like in the 50s of Boros commanders that I've played, so I wish I had just finished that project up back then when there were not 50 additional commanders that had to be played. Anyway, I've been wanting to tier rank all of the commanders for a long time, and I've been thinking about how best to present that video, and I figure the best way to do that is just by tier level, just so that we could break it up and the video's not like 90 minutes long. So with that, I present to you F-tier Boros commanders, the worst of the worst. Cards you do not want to play. Take my word for it. We'll start with the very first Boros commander ever printed. It came out in 2005, and that is Agris Kos. So I tried playing Agris a few times a few years back because it actually works really well in the 99 of a General Ferris Rokirik deck, and those commanders kind of want the same thing, so you can like pretty quickly swap one from the other. And I did that and made a few modifications for Agris Kos just to try and get it going, and it was terrible. It was so bad. Yeah, it was just not a good time trying to get this commander to work. So, biggest problems, it's probably overcosted relative to what it does and its power and toughness. It doesn't have haste. If it were 5 mana with haste, it might be more serviceable. It probably wouldn't be F tier if that were the case. And then after all that, the bonus is okay, but it's not amazing, right? So it's a 3/3 out of combat. If it attacks, it becomes a 5/5. Your red creatures get 2/0, your white creatures get 0/2, so if they're red and white, they get +2/+2. You can play a Dictate of Heliod and get a static +2/+2 all of the time. So, like, the bonus that we're talking about just isn't that meaningful, or you can play an Elish Norn and really get that bonus on steroids. And so yeah, there's a couple recurring themes that keep coming back with these commanders as we'll go through this list. So one thing you'll see is they're generally difficult to cast. Agris at 5 mana is a little slow. The second is they're difficult to set up. Agris rewards you for having a lot of creatures in play. With the pace of play now, it is generally difficult to have more than like 3 to 4 creatures in play up to about turn 7 or so. Number 3 is the payoff usually isn't worth it. In this case, we talked about it. You can cast Elish Norn and get a static +2/+2 and -2 on your opponents, and life is grand, right? Much better than what Agris is doing. Another factor is usually that like the size of the creature is too small relative to its casting cost. In this case, a 3/3 for 5 mana that only gets bigger during combat. A 3/3 outside of combat is pretty small. It's not going to do a lot of blocking for you. Another thing that we'll tend to see a lot is hard to synergize with. Agris isn't so bad on this particular scale in that your creatures just need to be red and white. And the final thing that we'll see a lot of is there just isn't a time in the game where you want to cast this commander. In the case of Agris, you have like a big setup turn on turn 5, where it's like, okay, you have your creatures beforehand, then you cast Agris, and then you hope to untap and probably slam like an Aurelia, and that would be like the Dreamland. And even when you do that, like, you'll probably kill one player maybe, but probably not going to kill more than one player. Anyway, my experience with Agris was pretty miserable, honestly, because it was just so hard to set up and just completely not worth trying to set up that ability. The final thing that you'll see a lot of is there is another commander that does it better. And in this case, Tori D'Evenant is a decent one. Maybe not amazing, but at least better than Agris Kos. You've got Jorkadine if you want to do more of an artifacts thing. You've got General Ferris Rokirik, as I mentioned, which is, it's a different deck than Agris Kos, but they share a lot of the same 99. And then, of course, probably better than all of them is Adriana. Adriana is a really good card. So yeah, Agris Kos was a miserable play experience, F-tier Boros commander, and on the fun scale, probably like a D. Like, I could see the world in which you might enjoy trying to make this thing work, but it was pretty rough. Moving on. The next commander on our list also came out at the same time, once again in 2005 in Ravnica City of Guilds, and essentially they're both tied for being the first Boros commanders. That is Razia Boros Archangel. Now, I love Razia as a card, but it is not good as a commander. Once again, the play experience for this was absolutely miserable. The 8 mana to get it into play is just so much, and it does not do enough for the 8 mana when it comes in. It's basically a big flying beat stick. Now, I have had some success with this in the 99 of a couple decks. In Angel Tribal, in Aurelia in particular, coming down with Flying Vigilance Haste and then having those 2 combats is actually really good in Aurelia, because just being a beat stick with Aurelia is enough damage to matter. And in that particular scenario, the haste is so incredibly good because of the double combats and everything just stacking together really nicely. And the other scenario that it's actually been decent is in Jegantha Tap Creature Tribal, because Jegantha cheats that mana cost. Depending on how many filter lands you can get in play, you're basically paying like a virtual 5 mana for Razia, and at 5 mana, she's not awful. She's still just kind of a beat stick, but because that deck is mostly small ground creatures that are not great in combat, I have actually found it useful to be getting those decent sized shots in the air in, while also having a reasonable blocker. So again, it's okay in the 99 of very specific decks, but as a commander, it was miserable. Again, it just comes down so late that, like, you know, a lot of your value in Boros is off of using equipment. There are some other options now, but for the longest time it was put equipment on thing, swing away with thing, and she's just so late into the game. It's too late to be trying to value once she comes in. You need to be trying to win the game at that point. So the other thing too is that tap ability is actually really hard to use. If you look at her top synergy cards, there is not a great synergy piece for that ability, because like the most common scenario would be like casting a Sulphurous Blast or a Deafening Clarion and then protecting one of your things, which is okay, but it's not as good as like protecting all of your things. And it's not going to do much for you against like a Blasphemous Act, which is one of the most commonly played cards in red. So I just found it like, I've had Razia in play a decent number of times in my life, and I've used that ability very few times. Like, I'm thinking I've probably seen it in play like somewhere between 10 and 20 times in my commander career, and I've used that ability like 3 or 4 times. It is hard. Now, I love Razia as a character. I would love to see her get an updated card. I would love to see her get that casting cost down and find a way to really ramp up that protection ability, make it much better, maybe just make it like full Boros Reckoner kind of thing where it prevents all the damage and shoots it back to a target. That's something that like you could reasonably start to mess around with a little bit more. But once again, Razia, F-tier Boros commander, and I really did not find her fun. I'm going to give her an F on the fun scale as well. And like we talked about with a lot of the other things, she's hard to set up, doesn't have a lot of synergy pieces, and you're generally better served by playing almost any other Boros commander. So the next one on our list is a card that I absolutely love to trash on, and that is Anya Merciless Angel. So I think this is the one that I've played the most and tried to make work, and I have declared in the past that Anya is the single worst Boros commander. And that was true up until a couple years ago. She has been usurped by another card on this list, which we'll talk about later. But for a very long period of time, Anya was the single worst Boros commander. Also the one that I've had the most arguments on like Twitter and various places about the efficacy of Anya, which she is bad. She is very bad. Let's take a look at her abilities, because she's a little bit unusual. So she's a 5-mana 4/4 with flying, and I'm going to paraphrase this. If your opponent has 19 or less life, she gets +3/+3 for each opponent who has less than that. And if an opponent has 19 or less life, she gains indestructible. Now, there are some problems with this. Number one, it's actually kind of difficult to get someone at 19 or less around turn 5 or so when you expect to play Anya. It's not that it can't happen, but it doesn't usually. The way games kind of go now is that you'll chip for a few points of damage early in the game. By turn 5 or so, a lot of players are maybe between like 30 and 35 life on average, and then all of the damage kind of happens at once between like turn 6 and 7. Like, a lot of times people die from like 20 to 25 life, which means Anya's ability is never getting turned on. That's just kind of the flow of the game now, which makes it super difficult to actually use her abilities. The even bigger problem is that if you kill one of those opponents who are at 19 or less life, they're no longer a part of the game, and her abilities don't look at that. And based on how bad that design is, it kind of tells me that they probably didn't playtest this card very much, because it feels terrible that as you eliminate opponents as you're supposed to, you are losing bonuses on Anya. Like, it is so hard for me to believe that this card went through playtesting and no one was like, hey, it's really difficult to trigger this ability, and it feels really bad when you eliminate an opponent who was giving you one of the benefits. For some additional context, about 2 weeks ago, I did do a live stream with Anya, and I think I played 3 games in that live stream, and across all 3 games, there was exactly 1 turn in which I was able to get her bonuses triggered. And even within that game, that was a 9-turn game. So 1 turn of a 9-turn game and 1 turn across 3 games, I was able to actually get her bonuses triggered. There was a fun moment where I did get to kill someone with Anya, which was exciting. But yeah, it's just so unbelievably difficult to trigger her abilities. And like, I don't know how you would fix that. If they use slightly different wording, if they use the like Withingar wording, whenever a player loses the game, she gets +3/+3, that would have been a much better formatting for the text, because then you can kill players and still get bonuses and things like that. There's any number of other things they could have done to make those abilities much better. All of that said, she is miserable to play because she's basically a 4/4 flyer, right? It's so difficult to get those other abilities. Like, you get them so little that she basically doesn't have them. If she was just a 4/4 flying with Indestructible, that would be a really cool card, and that's something that I could work with, right? Like, you can start doing the board wipe tribal thing, you can do like an Arc Bond thing, Boros Reckoner kind of thing. But the fact that she is indestructible so little of the time means you can't anticipate having it, which is super frustrating. I will say that I absolutely love the art on this card, and I very much wish she would get a new card with better abilities. I don't really know much about her lore-wise. She seems like a cool character. It's a cool art asset. I hope she gets another card. And going through the themes that show up on Anya, she's difficult to set up. The payoff really isn't worth it. She's tough to synergize with because you can't count on her abilities, in particular the Indestructible. If you could count on that Indestructible, she would be so much better. And just like every other commander on this list, you are better served playing literally any other Boros commander. Like, especially in this case, if you want a flyer, like Archangel Avacyn is going to be so much better. And by today's day and age, she's definitely a little overcosted. If she were 4 mana, I'm not saying she'd be great, because her abilities are still just designed poorly, but if she were a 4 mana 4/4 flyer, that's pretty aggressive, and you could do some stuff with that. But yeah, having played Anya as much as I've played Anya, she's just a frustrating commander to play because she's giving you those abilities so little of the time. So with that, she's an F tier Boros commander, and fun-wise, if you like a challenge, she's like a D tier on fun, right? Like, she's an interesting challenge to try and accomplish and to get those abilities to trigger, but all in all, it's totally not worth it, and, you know, is not game-winning or really even, like, puts you ahead in any measurable sense. So yeah, please don't play Anya. The next card on our list is Tiana Ship's Caretaker, one that is worse than I would have expected. I've only played it a couple times, but it is surprisingly bad. So let's take a read of Tiana. 5 mana for a 3/3 with flying and first strike. Whenever an aura or equipment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. That seems like a cool ability, but the main problem is that it's difficult to synergize with that ability. There just isn't that much. Like, yeah, you can use Auratog, but really all you're doing is making a creature big, and like, then you have to recast all of your auras, which is a lot of mana. Some of them have ETBs, and that's kind of cool. But the fact that it's also like triggers at the end step means that, you know, you can't really do any loops with it or anything, and it's an interesting little protection effect, which I've used it for in, like, Legendary Blades a couple times, where a board wipe will go off, and, you know, I get a couple things back to hand. But a lot of times in that deck, those things were Kaldra, and Kaldra's super expensive to cast, so it's like, yeah, this helps a little bit, but it's not as good as just having a protection spell, because you still have to recast the card, and in the case of Kaldra, that's a lot of mana and is still really expensive and just gets clunky. And again, it plays into that theme of there just aren't great synergies available with her ability, and, you know, again, her ability is limited so heavily by the fact that they go back to the hand and at the end step. If they were coming straight back to play, this would be an incredibly cool card. Or even at the very least, if the card came back to your hand immediately, because then again, you know, you could like sack and loop through like any of the white auras that have draw a card attached to them. You could like mess around with that stuff a little bit. But she's just so hard to abuse, and even beyond that, just so hard to like generate meaningful advantage in any way. And as a 5-mana 3/3, she's a little bit undersized. First Strike is okay, but, you know, by itself is probably the least impactful keyword. So the big revealing moment that I had with Tiana is that someone sent me a Tiana list a while ago, and I played it. It's on the channel somewhere. Tiana went down pretty early into that game. Like, I think I cast her one time and she just got blown up by something. At no point did I want to spend the mana to get her back. And that's like another thing that tends to come with these commanders, is that like literally anything in your 99 is probably better than your commander, especially if your commander's already died once. You know, that is a telling problem, that like this card is so bad that I don't even want to recast it. So Tiana, F tier Boros commander, and fun rating, probably an F, again, because it's just like, it doesn't do that much. But you might be able to convince me to a D tier on fun, just because doing like Oratog stuff is a little bit unique. With no further ado, we are getting to the single worst Boros commander ever printed, and that is Odri Bloodcursed. There's a ton of text on this card that all says it does nothing. It's such a bad card. But if I must read it, it's a 3/3 for 3. When it enters the battlefield, create X blood tokens, where X is the number of abilities from the following list of abilities that you control. So the problem with this card is that there is no point in the game in which you want to cast it. It's not good on turn 3 because you probably don't have that many things in play, if any at all, to get that trigger. And even when you do, it's only looting. Looting is fine, but it's not amazing. Like if you have a Gift of Estates or Land Tax, it gets a little better, but in general, looting is not the best. And in general, I run very little looting unless I'm specifically doing a Reanimator thing. So more often than not, when you're casting Odri on turn 3, it's going to be a 3/3 with literally no abilities. It's basically just a vanilla 3/3 because you're probably not getting anything off of it, maybe one token. 2 if you're curving out, but like, if you curved out on creatures, you probably didn't ramp, and that's going to be far worse for you. And then the other problem is, on turn 6, when you might have some good creatures out there that can trigger the abilities, it's not really worth it, right? All you're getting is these loot tokens that are just not great. If the blood tokens were actual card draw, there might be something here, but just as looting, it doesn't feel good. And like, I played this deck, I think twice, and what I noticed was like, this is one of the single hardest commanders to set up. Like, I had probably 3 or 4 good synergy pieces in play when I cast Odri, and I still needed like 3 to 4 more cards to be able to do the thing. It was like incredibly disheartening. I'm like, wow, I need like an 8-card combo to be able to use Odri efficiently. And it just does so little. So again, looking at our list, it's difficult to set up. The payoff is not worth it. Any Boros commander will do the same thing but better, which is that they do something, and that this does basically nothing. More specifically, if you want a keyword thing, you can do like 7 mana Achroma with any of the red partners. Or if you just want like a 3/3 that you can get in early and beat face with, there's plenty of good options for that too. I would take Anax and Cymede over this all day, right? And Anax and Cymede are okay. They're not going to blow you away with power, but they do something. And, you know, they do at least one thing well, which is you put some equipment on them and get like a Crown of Flames or something to pump your team up, right? Like, it does something. Odri does nothing. And what makes this one hurt more than anything else is that it was a beloved character. Like, everyone likes the first 2 Odri cards a lot. And this thing is just badly designed. It'd be fine if it was just like some random uncommon in the set and, you know, you would just kind of dismiss it. But the fact that it's a character that people like and it's legendary, it gets a lot more scrutiny of like, why did you do that? And secondly, did you playtest this at all? Because it's terrible. I don't even know if that ability was good in standard or like even draft. So yeah, with Odric, you're getting a 3/3 for 3 that probably does nothing. If you blink it late in the game, maybe you get some looting, but like, again, it's just looting. And also, like we talked about with a lot of the other commanders, there just isn't a time in the game where you want to cast this. Like, it's not good on turn 3, it's not good on turn 6. Maybe it does something on turn 10 if the game goes that long, but it's also like, if it's doing something, that means you probably have other creatures that are better than it in play. It's that kind of thing where the show is going to get stolen by the other cards in the 99, which shouldn't happen when the deck is built around your commander. So yeah, Odric Blood Curse, the single worst Boros commander. Please do not play it. It is F tier, it is not fun. Also getting the rank of F tier on fun. Please stay away. It is a bad time. Anyway, with that, hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching. So recently I've been working on a secret project that's really cool, but it's also going to be horrendously expensive to get filmed. So I greatly appreciate anything you guys are able to contribute to the Patreon in order to fund that video, and I hope to be able to share it soon. And of course, thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome.